unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to unSILOed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Lixing Sun, who is a professor of biology at Central Washington University, and also the author of a couple books, the most recent of which I have with me. It's called The Liars of Nature and the Nature of Liars, Cheating and Deception in the Living World. Also have another book called The Fairness Instinct. And your first book was on beavers. I don't have that one, but I'll maybe ask you a few questions about beavers. Welcome, Lixing.
Oh, thank you, Greg.
Now, your book, this Liars of Nature, it follows a trajectory that's kind of the opposite of the trajectory that, my interests have followed, because, you start off in the biological world talking about animals, and then, towards the end of the book, you start moving more and more into a discussion of people. And of course, people are animals. We have to be reminded of that. But, your interest moved from the natural sciences to the social sciences, and then even into kind of the world of philosophy. And, my interest started in social sciences and then moved into the biological sciences. But it's remarkable how many parallels and similarities there are. And, you're really channeling, I think, the spirit of John Maynard Smith, right, in your work. He's kind of the guy that I always look to when I think about frequency-dependent evolution. And a big theme in your book is this idea of frequency dependence. So, maybe you could recap for us sort of, have you always thought that when you were studying animals like beavers, in the back of your head, were you also thinking about, what can we learn about humans by looking at animals like beavers?
Yeah. In our world, as we know, the more we know that about humans and about animals, the more we feel they are connected. So evolution is the way to go. Evolution is always a way to go. And I'm pretty much a jack of all trades. I like everything. I would read whatever comes to me, especially when books and videos or any programs with new ideas. They always appeal to me. And then I try to make it more systematic. I studied economics by learning from YouTube videos.
Right.
Actually, it was from Berkeley. Berkeley actually posted a series of microeconomics, macroeconomics online. So I spent several summers learning through these things while reading at others. So that's a way I'm interested in economics all the time. I actually have taught behavioral economics as well. So the approach to many of the issues are integrative. And I hope that more people would come together to talk about issues rather than, you are anthropologists, you are biologists, you are economists, and sort of like pigeonhole into small little niches. You feel comfortable within, but difficult to talk with people outside. So I think it's sort of like a more synthesis. The integration of different disciplines is the way to go, especially in today's world. We face a lot of problems. We try to do the same thing or from different approaches. And instead of the book is a sort of more into the biological foundations of cheating and its evolutionary process, eventually end in humans, because the book is small, it's concise, it's economic, so I cannot do much about it, but at least I have tossed around some of the new ideas for people to think through. They may develop new ideas, new insights. That's wonderful. That would be wonderful. So as I said, a book about cheating without talking about humans is like a drama without a climax. Without climax, although this climax is small in this book, but I think people get the idea, and hopefully they will build on that and develop their own. We will see a lot more in terms of cheating, in cheating, at which I separate them into lying and deception due to the different biological foundations involved. So I think if
Yeah, I
I
mean,
have any contribution to Oxford English Dictionary, that should be.
yeah, I want to talk about the distinction there, but it's interesting that you taught a course on behavioral economics, right? Because a course like that, could be described as economics and psychology, or economics and biology, and I think that you could come at it from either side. But this book is there's no math in this book, and there's no graphics in this book. It's you've managed to convey these very difficult concepts, without having to resort to any kind of formal models, which is pretty difficult actually. But you managed to do it somehow. I mean, were you intending to? Was that sort of a choice, a conscious choice to sort of avoid any kind of formalization of what you're describing?
Yeah, you can always do some biological evolutionary modeling. I was infinitely complex mathematical models, but that's the part for academic books, not for this science nonfiction. So I try to convey as plainly as possible in the language that could be understood by anybody who are interested in these issues. But for sure that people have some biological background, even at the Bio 101 level, that would help. There are, most people appreciate it a lot. Professionals like it a lot more. But some people feel like, oh, I haven't developed enough to convey the information. And sometimes people feel like a little bit too dense, but depending on people's taste. So
Now,
I tried my best. Yeah.
yeah. So, and because I start off, my teaching is in the business school, right? And so, I teach a course on strategy, and I use a lot of analogies from biology in my strategy class. But of course, when we're teaching strategy, we're talking about humans, we're talking about strategic behavior, right? We're talking about
Yeah.
conscious thinking individuals who have to look at the world from the perspective of others, and they have to, make choices. But you point out that cheating and deception, the way you describe it, doesn't even require a brain, right? And I had a previous podcast where we tried to define behavior, right? And does behavior require any kind of thought or decision making? And I think you would describe this behavior of plants and viruses, right, using the same type of terminology that you would use to describe the behavior of Bernie Madoff and these other very, very human actors.
Yeah, that's a great point. From evolutionary perspective, lots of, for example, mimicry, camouflage. There's no way you can require a brain. But basically, they take advantage of an animal's cognitive weakness. So it's an evolutionary game. The game theory plays a huge role in the study of evolution. As you mentioned, John Maynard Smith, he was the person who introduced the game theory from mathematics or economics as well into evolutionary studies. He called it evolutionarily stable strategy. They're looking for the most common strategy. For example, it's a stable condition, which strategy is dominant versus which strategy is not dominant. So this actually opens up quite a bit in behavioral and evolutionary approaches. So as to why you don't need a brain to cheat, to cheat, that's relatively simple, because as long as you have a niche, the ecological niche, or the no matter is economic niche, the organisms can always take advantage of it. Basically, you have a niche, and you have this adaptive evolution, to fit the niche, to take advantage of it. So that's the evolutionary process. It does not require conscious thinking, sort of like in psychology approach. In humans, you need a conscious thinking. But interestingly, in humans, actually, the best cheaters don't think about the consciousness.
Yeah.
Best cheaters got their own consciousness shut down. That's one of my chapters, the chapter 7, about self-deception. Self-deception is for better cheating, because when your consciousness is shut down, you can cheat fluently without finding any conflict. So that's the kind of mental load. If you feel like, well, I'm cheating, it's bad, but you are doing that anyway, and that kind of conflict would betray you. And people could tell from your eye contact or facial expression that you are not telling the truth. There are some people who are really good at that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, when you use the terms, lying and deception and cheating, I mean, these are normative terms, right? And, biology is a immoral, heartless, process. And so, I mean, did you ever think that maybe using those words was inappropriate? I mean, is it, I mean, I think it helps us to understand what's going on. You actually referred to the, Wazon selection task and how, when it's expressed in pure logic, people have a difficult time understanding it. And when you tell it as a story of cheating, then everybody understands it right away. I mean, do biologists in their research use those terms, or do they use them in scare quotes? Right? I mean, how do you use that in your day job?
Among biologists, cheating is used, even for fish, for example, but without referring to intention. Mm-hmm. Deception is used as well. Mimicry, camouflage, these are the words that we often use. But this is not an academic book. If you stick with academic accuracy, you turn off people. So I try to make it fun, with the understanding that people get the message clearly, that I'm not using, for example, masquerade. For example, some other colorful words, such as design some kind of strategy. But design is in terms of evolution. It is design, but animals don't do that, of course. They evolve to be like that. They evolve to do things that benefit them at the moment. So that is, and people in academia really, really like that kind of approach, give them feel like a fresh air, and it's easy to pick up the information. A few people outside academia may have trouble saying, well, you are too anthropomorphic. You are too anthropomorphic. You're using these words that we only use in humans. Yeah. Writing for the general public always has this kind of downside. You want to make them enjoy the book, reading it, and finding fun things there. But if you do too much, people feel, oh, that's human. That's a little bit too human, too anthropomorphic. But on the other side, if you're writing in strict academic terms, people find it's not interesting. It's not interesting. You could just read a review paper or something that is totally written in academic terms to get exactly what it means. So there's always a trade-off for being academically rigorous versus communicative, vivid, the kind of provoking, the kind of imagery in reader's mind.
Well, maybe let's talk about some of the. I mean, I love these stories. I mean, you go through all of some of my favorite stories, not only in biology but in human behavior. And when you're talking about these examples of deception and exploitation of biases, sometimes it's about the relationship between predator and prey. Sometimes it's between kind of mating partners. Sometimes it's between, offspring and parents. Sometimes it's between cooperators and rivals and so forth. But, it's really all about, I guess, communication broadly understood. And so communication doesn't require the intent to send a message, right? Communication is just anytime there is information that is transmitted, right? So all of these are really about communication.
Yeah.
Could we maybe dig into some of the examples? There was a great example. You were telling this story about how you were out with your research associate. I guess he was interested in capturing some
Ducks, right?
ducks for
That's
for
a great
dinner.
story, yeah.
Yeah, and one of them kind of, I guess, not played dead, but played injured.
Yeah. Yeah, that has been found in a wider range of birds and some other animals as well. But birds in particular, especially these ducks, these plovers, the shorebirds, they do that all the time because they are ground nesters. Ground nesters often encounter with the predators. So they play injured and to drag away, to distract the potential predators so as to protect themselves, protect their chicks. That's very common. And I think that there is a friend of mine is putting together sort of like searching around to see what kind of birds do that. But that would be nice, but it's widely spread. Grand dragging birds are the most common.
And then playing dead also, right? So a lot of creatures will play dead, and then when the predator loses interest or gets distracted, then they jump up and run away, right?
Pretty much, yeah. The possums, even the rodents, even deer fawns and antelope babies and all these things do that. The other day I saw a video about a wild dog who was hunted by a leopard. Oh, a lion, I believe, it's a lion, while other wild dogs try to mob the lion. So that the lion in the mouth of the lion played dead, and when the lion dropped it and to fight against the other wild dogs, that wild dog just ran away. So yeah, it's pretty much everywhere. And when you find that, well, you cannot fight the fate, playing death probably is the best strategy.
Right. And then there are other examples where you have a predator that will, I guess, mimic a prey animal, right? In order to lure, right, some prey to its death.
Yeah, lots of them. Praying mantises, for example, they pretend to be motionless until somebody near them, and then before they strike. So that's very common. Lizards, especially like chameleons, they always blend themselves into the background, and they can change quickly so as to lure the others coming. Anglerfish in the bottom of the ocean would also pretend to have sort of like a bioluminescence, hang out a raw-like structure when other little fish coming to investigate or try to eat, and they got eaten. So yeah, these strategies, a whole range of them. They do these camouflage. They try to blend themselves into the background, while at the same time they try to watch out and see their potential prey items coming. So yeah, this kind of dynamic is probably the best known and the most commonly studied in biology.
Now, you make this distinction between sort of lying and exploitation, right? I mean, could you talk about that? I mean, how should we think about those as being sort of different approaches to deception?
Yeah, lying is referring to communication. A boy crying wolf is lying because he is sending the wrong information to take advantage of being cared by others. So that is lying. He should say, there's no wolf when he cries for wolf, he is lying because there's no wolf. That's the reality. That's communication. Deception is different. Deception is not necessarily communication, but deception is to take advantage of our cognitive bias. For example, probably this is the most relevant for business and economics. We have a meat product that is 5% fat. But instead of saying this meat product has 5% fat, we say 95% fat-free. Because we have this kind of cognitive bias to something that is good. So when 95% fat-free, that is a good product. But when you say 5% fat-free, the fat, that is bad. The information is exactly the same. But when you advertise as 95% fat-free, that is more appealing. That is more appealing. Right. So that is this is pretty much as most commercials would do. They try to promote the positive side of it. Coca-Cola always promotes itself to coldness, which would quell our thirst very quickly. But of course, you have with the polar bear in the Arctic area, that really does not matter, but as long as people feels good. So this is deception. This is not lying. But if you say, if a manufacturer would say, well, this is 1% fat or 99% fat-free instead of 95% fat-free, that is lying and that is illegal. So you could see the lying and deception is different. In this case, deception is allowed in most of the commercials with some exaggeration, but lying is not, because you falsify the product information, which will violate U.S. law, our law.
But in both cases, you're taking advantage of some weakness, right? And that weakness could be a bias, or it could just be an inability to detect the lie, right? And so presumably there's an incentive or some pressure, evolutionary pressure, to, either get better at detecting the lies or to kind of plug the holes in the biases. And so, does that mean that our capacity to identify these things is itself a result of some trade-offs? So should we just think that the benefits of the extra added machinery that we would need would be outweighed by the costs of that new machinery?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely. It's evolutionary arms race. So you have liars or cheaters. I just call cheaters because it could be deception as well. You have cheaters that try to take advantage of its victims, but you have victims who would fight back, not to be fooled, not to be deceived, not to be lied. So whenever you have negative interactions, the evolutionary game is always arms race. So that is, they evolve together. I used this cuckoo and warbler co-evolution. And I also used this the butterfly, the Alcan blue butterfly, and its ant colony, the co-evolutionary process. They try to stay one step ahead of the other, so as to not to be fully taken advantage of. So that kind of intricacy is really the core of the evolutionary process. I hailed it as creating the kind of diversity, creating even beauty, for example.
Yeah, you just love all these examples, right? Yeah. But I think the key point here is that in order for cheating and deception to be a successful strategy, it has to be relatively rare, right? Because as it becomes more common, that creates an incentive for kind of better detection. But what I found really interesting, particularly in the cuckoo example, is that this is something which doesn't just happen at the Darwinian level, right? It's not something which just happens at the level of the genotype, but rather these birds can learn over time, right? That surprised me. So you're saying that these birds, if there are too many cuckoo eggs, then they start paying more attention, right? They adjust sort of the sensitivity of their classifier and then start kicking these eggs out of the nest.
Yeah, yeah. That's I wouldn't say learning is critically important, but nowadays, from our understanding, well, they also change the genetic system as well. So because those good learners will pass on more genes of themselves. So basically, everything associated with learning, with better learning, that kind of situation, will be represented more in the next generation and over. And so the genetic system changes as well. And there's another one, way of trying to blur this kind of nature nurture thing. Nature nurture are really connected. They cannot be separated. And you know that the current evolutionary thinking using the epigenetics, for example, and basically it is the sort of like putting the nature nurture together as a whole system, rather than you try to see them as a dichotomous one or the other, rather than both. So I think that helps.
Yeah. Well, look, the cuckoos are such a great example. And, you know, I think when most people find out about the cuckoos, they are, you know, the cuckoos are like the bad guys, right? But you know, it's kind of remarkable what they're able to do. And you mentioned there's really kind of two mechanisms that they can use. I mean, one of which just sort of takes advantage of the kind of classifier that the host birds have, but the other one is sort of the extortion racket, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So could you talk about the difference there?
Yeah, cuckoo tries to hide themselves as much as possible so they could sneak into their eggs into their host nests. But another one is like these mockingbirds and cowbirds in our country. The cowbirds widely existing, and cowbirds lay eggs in maybe more than 100 birds, whatever, in their vicinity. They will parasitize that. In that kind of situation, it's still very difficult to lay eggs that are similar enough to fool the host birds. So in that kind of situation, the only way to do is just make it more costly for host species if they reject these parasitized eggs, so that to make them comply with whatever it is there, so as to be a better strategy than tossing out these obvious parasitic birds' eggs. If you toss my eggs out, you are going to fail this entire reproductive season. So they have to put up with that kind of parasitism. Sort of like enslave these the mafia. They're coming to your shop and distorting for money. Give me money, otherwise we are going to destroy you. That's exactly the kind of strategy we already have.
But I think you said if they try to take too much, then it tips the balance, and then the host birds don't even bother to raise.
Yeah, that's right. They cannot overdo it. For example, if you keep a couple of host birds' eggs there, they'll be fine because they're sort of like a sheer profit.
Yeah. So there's like a Laffer curve. There's like a Laffer curve for brood parasitism.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you know, a lot of what you're talking about is cooperation. This is an area that I'm deeply interested in, and, you know, free riding, right? And so, you know, I think every community can support a certain level of free riding, but once it exceeds some threshold, then it makes sense to invest more in detection and in punishment.
Policing, yeah.
And what I was surprised by is that, you know, even among the slime molds, right, they engage in cooperation. Bacteria engage in cooperation, right, with the formation of biofilms. And so, you know, how does this cooperation get perpetuated? Why isn't everyone a free rider?
Yeah, free riding is the best, easiest way to do, especially in any community. And it could also destroy sort of like community spirit as well. But when these, recently they talk about the collective behavior in and the punishment in bacteria, and that was fairly recent. Actually, that has happened in recent decades. And when the people talk about bacterial cooperation, some people were skeptical, but they do. They do. They actually, for example, I use this example of siderophores. These are sort of like helium protein in our blood. But this siderophore is a chemical compound that is responsible for trapping the iron, the iron ion in the environment, which is essential for their survival. But for individual bacteria, they are not powerful enough to have enough. Sort of like you have a large seine, a large net that requires several boats to operate. You cannot operate by yourself to catch fish. So that's exactly it is. So the bacteria would gang up together or band together and secreting these siderophores into the environment, which is costly, costs material and energy, and then share the profits, share the catch, which is the ion, essential ion. But the problem is then you have the collective work, you have cooperation, then you also have free riders contributing less while getting more. So the bacteria develop strategies on some kind of genetic loci with genes that actually recognize each other, see whether you are collaborators or not. And they even secrete toxins to kill those non-collaborators. So this is really fantastic. And this cannot be explained but by this kind of cheating and anti-cheating, that kind of arms race in this situation.
Well, so a lot of what you're describing is about identifying kind of in-group and out-group, right?
Out-group,
and,
yes.
And then, actors kind of pretending to be members of the in-group, right? And I think you talk about this with beavers, right? So beavers have pheromones. So you did all your initial work with beavers, and they form these very complicated communities, right? And they have almost like citizenship in the different groups. So how do they tell who's part of the group and who's not part of the group? And can they tell, whether someone's a cooperator or a defector in some easy way?
Yeah, the cooperative defector, that part is, I don't know. But they can tell kin versus non-kin, or genetic kin versus non-kin, by the anal gland secretion, which is a pasty, oily stuff in one of the glands. Not a castoreum. Castoreum was used as a high grade perfume during colonial times, before we have the synthetic chemical compounds. But this oily stuff, the pasty stuff, that contains the information about how two individuals are related. So the more similar they smell, or the more similar the composition of the chemical compounds are between the two individuals, the more closely they are related. So they judge each other by the smell of the anal gland secretion. I have seen that during the spring runoff, when snow melts, the beavers would run around. Sometimes they lost their colony, and they would seek sort of like a sojourn, as a temporary stay in their relatives. And there's no other way you could know that this would be relatives without sniffing out. No, this is my relative. And I dissected a few beavers, and once in a while I found there were huge scars on their pelt, the internal side of it. So we know that the interaction must be violent. But if you can let your relatives stay in your, or if you can let other beavers stay in your lodge, it's just impossible for non-relatives to take a shelter in another intact lodge while the non-relative is wandering around and trying to find a place to stay. Otherwise, there would be no violent interactions. I've observed actually the once during the kind of high flood season when lots of lodges got washed off, the beavers actually were trying to take advantage of somebody else, and the territorial owners would seek them out, making these hissing voice, looking around quite nervously to seek these strangers and try to drive them away.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are some examples where this scent can be copied, right? So you talk about the caterpillars that somehow convince the ants that they're ants, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the chemical mimicry. They secrete a brand of chemicals that mimic the ants. So basically, it's chemical eavesdropping. Eavesdropping. So the ants recognize each other by so-called the hydrocarbons on their body surface, supposedly to be foolproof, but not. You have butterflies that actually secrete the similar carbon hydrocarbons to mimic the ants. By the way, I also talked a little bit about that. Sometimes the mimic is not perfect; they got killed. Mm-hmm. So these caterpillars also take a huge risk of not being successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then also another form of mimicry is when these snakes, there are some snakes that are boldly colored because they want everybody to know that, they are who they are, right? These poisonous snakes. And then these other snakes that don't bother with all the expensive poison production, just, look like poisonous snakes.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
You can have your cake and eat it too, so to speak.
Yeah, the famous case is eastern king snake mimicking the deadly coral snake with the similar ring patterns. Although actually the sequence is different on the ring, but typically birds of prey will not mess around with it just in case the consequence would be mortal if they made a mistake. So that is the way they don't even need exactly close enough mimicry as long as they look similar enough.
Mm-hmm. And you distinguish between Batesian and Mullerian mimicry. What's the difference between these two?
Yeah, the innocuous, the poisonous, the non-toxic snakes such as king snakes mimicking the deadly toxic coral snake. It is the Batesian, or I call it Batesian. It's easier to pronounce. Lots of people do that. The Batesian mimicry is named after the English naturalist of around Darwin's time, Henry Bates, who discovered the phenomenon when he was in South America. And so you have the innocent species, poisonous, harmless species mimicking deadly, dangerous animals. So they could also mimic the environmental objects, such as, for example, bugs, for example. So try to hide themselves, and you can also have lots of these things, the mimicry. But Mullerian mimicry is very different. Mullerian mimicry is the mimic of all these toxic species. By being look-alike, they could repel the possibility of being sampled by these stupid birds, for example. The typical example is the Viceroid butterfly and the monarch butterfly. They look exactly, almost exactly alike. The Viceroid is slightly smaller, but they are deadly toxic. We have the birds, especially these young birds, who is not experienced enough. They would still sample by killing a few of these birds before they learn their hard lessons. But by mimicking the same thing, they actually send off the warning signals so as to reduce the probability of being wrongly sampled. So this mirroring mimicry actually is quite different from the Bayesian mimicry. Mirroring mimicry is basically converge in certain kind of universal color code. We call the apple. We call the warning color. We call warning color by being orange, red, blue. It's just sticking out from environment, telling other potential predators, "Don't eat me. If you do, you die." So many of these species, whenever they see these orange, blue, red, and all these bright colors, they just go away. It would be stupid to try. So that way they protect themselves.
Well, in addition to predator-prey dynamics, there's sort of, male-female dynamics. And, I was recently discussing in my class some evidence from these dating websites where apparently, everybody lies about their height and their age
for men,
and their income, right? And but animals do this too, right?
Yeah, they always do. Yeah, always do. They try to do bluff. They try to beef up their image, so as to impress others. So then you have this, the handicap hypothesis. By having a handicap, you prove yourself that you are the real deal instead of the phony. So that's the evolution of these exaggerated features, the bright colors, the peacock's tails, and all these things, or the staghorn, the large jaw in staghorn beetles, and all these things to impress the females. It's costly. It would be otherwise useless, but it shows that, well, I'm the guy, the real deal, instead of, I'm phony. So everybody could lie, and from human perspective, so people can always do cheating. When they don't have money, they can borrow a BMW, for example, to impress potential dates, and by exaggerating the body height, for example, for men, but also by reducing the body weight for women, so as you could impress others. But when you meet, and that will be totally different. But you have to dip in the first leg first before you get a chance, right? So that is people still do on the dating sites, full of untruthful information.
Now, I think one of the points is that you can't really check out of this game, right? I mean, if everyone is sort of engaging in puffery and exaggeration, if everybody is playing the signaling game, then it's very difficult to sort of opt out, right? So you talk towards the end of the book about everyone who's applying for colleges, and they have to kind of exaggerate their credentials, and when you're applying for a job, where everybody kind of puffs up their credentials a little bit. So if you're the one person that says, you know what, I'm just going to be completely objective and honest, no exaggeration whatsoever, then you're going to lose the game, right?
That's exactly, it's exactly the case. So we have the two levels of being honest. One is individual criterion, being honest, and you have a societal criterion. So when you are out there looking for a job or looking for a date, does not matter. The societal norm dominates. So we have to comply with that. Otherwise, if we are overly sneaky or overly honest, we are selected against.
Right. Yeah, and I sometimes will tell my students, right, that if they decide they're going to opt out, right, then they have to be prepared to pay the consequences, right? Because these things, I mean, there's an arms race, and if you're not playing the arms race, then you'll be disadvantaged.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the societal norm you try to play against. Well, sort of like a game theory, right? Playing against the field.
Right. And then, of course, you'd spend some time talking about infidelity, right? And, I think this is another topic that makes some people a little uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people wanted to believe that some creatures were faithful, like, pair bonding in birds. And, we've discovered that this too is sort of a frequency dependent strategy, right? And, and if all birds were faithful, then sort of, mate guarding would disappear and cheater detection would disappear. And then all of a sudden, you'd get more cheating. And so there seems to be an equilibrium level of cheating in all of these populations, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was surprising since the 1980s when genetic tools became available. People have found so many birds cheat behind the males, and especially in songbirds, which mostly were considered monogamous, but they are not, in fact. And now people believe, statistics shows that, more than 90% of these pair bonding birds actually cheat. Data are data, and biology is biology. We should not place the kind of our moral sense there. And that is the biology, and the birds don't care about our feeling. It's just that we needed the kind of symbol to be associated with, and turned out to be we were wrong with birds, pair bonding birds. So, but by cheating around, actually birds, lots of birds and other species as well, gain a lot. Recently, studies show that the female cheating actually is substantial, and there are lots of benefits associated with that. In my book, I talked a little bit of it, but now there is more. There's more to know why cheating is a good strategy among female animals, including humans. Data do not lie, especially about us. I have this data that's from studies for men, 22 to 25% in their lifetime they do cheat, and women 11 to 15% cheat in their lifetimes as well. So, so it's quite substantial.
Right, and then I think you mentioned that social species, right? They have to invest a lot more in both learning how to cheat and learning how to detect cheating, right? And so particularly, I mean, humans seem to be the most complex, the most complicated, right, with respect to, cheating strategies. Right?
Yeah.
So is this? I mean, this is sort of the Machiavellian brain hypothesis, right, or the social brain hypothesis.
Yeah.
But I think your main point is that the flip side of this, I mean, this book, The Liars of Nature and the Nature of Liars, could also have been titled, The Truth Tellers of Nature and the Nature of Truth Tellers, right? Because the flip side of the story is that choosing a strategy of honesty or choosing a strategy of deception, it really does depend. And in a world full of liars, it makes sense to be truthful. And in a world of truth tellers, it kind of pays to be a liar, right?
Yes, it's absolutely. If you still remember, in the 1990s, Randy Thornhill and his wife wrote a book. It's about rape. Rape is natural. Remember that one? Natural history of rape. It caused a huge stir among people. When you make a case of certain strategy, natural history of rape, but you can also write about book natural history of being faithful, for example, or being kind and nice. So people were saying that, look, we can be rapists, so we can also be saints as well. So there's always the both side, the other side as well. When I talk about cheat, but cheat is in contrast to being honest for being truthful. So one way or the other, and in terms of evolutionary process, it does not matter whenever which strategy is adaptive, which means can bring more fitness. The organisms will go for that. We do not try to judge people using our moral sense. But whenever you have, for example, being dishonest versus being honest, whichever works better, the organisms will go for that. I'm not just saying animals, animals, but they will go for that because it opens a niche for one strategy to evolve against the other.
Now, in your other book, The Fairness Instinct, I mean, is the instinct for fairness, the way you describe it, I mean, is that also frequency dependent? Could that book have also been written as the unfairness instinct?
Yeah, you can also do that as well. People try to take advantage of others because the benefit is there. Evolution is about relative fitness. That's the envy, the jealousy, all these come to play. You try to gain the upper hand against your rivalries so that you can pass more genes down. But at the same time, you also have these your opponents who fight you back. But then at the end, this kind of game will rest in the balance of being fair. You get what you want, I get what I have, and then you have the kind of tenuous stability. Although one party is trying to gain advantage of the others, but at least you have peace once you have this fair or perceived fair situation condition. So that is also a frequency dependent evolution or selection.
Now, do you think that when you take this perspective to the study of things like deception in the media and hacking of computer systems, I mean, do you think this gives you the ability to understand these phenomenon in a different way? And can you use that insight to maybe predict whether or not there will be an increase or decrease in sort of the magnitude of deception and cheating in those domains, right? Because, we know there's an equilibrium phenomenon, right? And there's always going to be some, but the costs and benefits can change so that the one strategy can become more attractive, right, relative to the other over time. Are we seeing that? I mean, when you look at the prevalence of, say, misinformation in media or the amount of kind of puffery in advertising and the amount of exaggeration in, say, CVs. I mean, and of course, there's been all of this talk about the reproducibility crisis in social science, right? And, one recent case, I have a lot of friends who were involved as co-authors with some dubious studies. And, you ask them like, well, how could you trust this co-author of yours? And they say, well, like most co-authors are honest. So I'm not going to invest a lot in uncovering dishonesty. So can we sort of look at the phenomenon and make predictions about kind of the equilibrium rate or prevalence of the cheating strategies relative to the honesty strategies?
Yeah, that issue, we can all feel that the recent change, especially when the digital space opened up, since the digital space opened up. And the one most important thing is when the internet becomes available for everybody, suddenly there is a totally new place for cheating. So that's not surprising when you suddenly find a lot more cheaters on the digital space, on the digital universe, because that's a new venue, right, for cheating.
So
But
is it a disequilibrium phenomenon? In other words, like, people start with the assumption that, vendors are honest because they've grown up in a world where, vendors exist in communities and in bricks and mortar space, and there's some remedy available. And then we shift to this completely different domain where everything's online and everything's anonymous, and, these people exist somewhere and can't be tracked down or whatever. And so we're using the classifier that was optimized for a different set of cost benefits in this new world. And that's why, there's the vulnerability. And then I guess over time, people will learn to become more skeptical, and then these misinformation or deception strategies will become less effective over time.
well, that has been evolving all the time. You look at the Amazon consumers' comments, for example, books or other comments. Used to be everybody could do the comments, but nowadays you have to buy, for example, authorized buyer or something.
Yeah.
So these strategies evolve. So when the internet began to be open in the 1990s, it prompted a realignment of strategies. And so these different strategies evolve and settle. So whenever there's anything new, basically our original balance point has been tipped off. So then we have to reestablish the new equilibrium, just as you said that, right? So that is the kind of situation we are facing.
Right. I mean, I bought a bunch of these, $10, $20 dongles on Amazon that turned out to be worthless pieces of plastic. But the cost of my investigating, it took me, I'm not going to spend 20 minutes going through the comments. I'm just going to spend the $10, and if it doesn't work, then, no big deal.
eBay as well. eBay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I guess because if they're just stealing a little bit, then the immune system's just going to let it fly, right? We're just going to allow it to happen. But when the consequences get to be much larger, then we're going to take action.
Yeah, that's right. And depending on people as well, younger generations tend to be more savvy about the scams going around. They learn quickly. The older people, the older citizens, tend to be slower, and their cognitive sharpness is declining. And they may not realize that until they got scammed, for example. And lots of these scams are particularly designed for people who are weak in terms of telling scams apart. For example, the Nigerian prince, Nigerian prince scam, and every day billions of emails sent out to people. Most of us will say, that's scam, and just delete it. But just takes a very small proportion of people, most of the elderly citizens, to reply to these people, and they got fooled. So basically, this is so obvious, everybody would think, that's scam. But if you cannot tell this is a scam, you are prime candidate for being fooled.
This is an example of the kind of predators picking off the the old
obvious
and
target,
the weak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just another version of of selection, I guess. In sorts. Yeah. And I remember there was this story where this anti-corruption campaigner in India was gathering up a huge amount of support, and had hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets against corruption. And then it was discovered that he himself had lied about the value of his house in order to minimize his tax bill, and then the whole movement kind of collapsed, right? Because they realized that everybody had to engage in some level of deception. And I thought that was a bit unfair, right? Because there's more and there's less, right? And this seemed to be a relatively trivial thing.
Yeah, that's we are always at a certain level. Most of us are mostly honest. Well, occasionally doing something else. Well, that's why the dynamics of our social network and friendship as well. Yeah, I personally I have had many friends at one time or another would do something that unacceptable for me, and some of the friendships are actually have been repaired. Others are just never come back.
Now you mentioned there are 3 big anti-cheating techniques, right?
Yeah.
So are those ones that we can incorporate into our own lives in order to kind of reduce the impact of cheating on us? I mean,
Yeah.
and would you offer us a similar 3? I didn't see these, but are there a similar set of principles that will help us to become better cheaters?
Well, it's always the case when you are aware of how people do it, and then you, I mean, as at your own disposal now. But I do believe that humans, by supporting the honest behavior, give moral support, give reputational support, reward the honesty while suppressing the negative, the malicious cheating. And we thrive. We develop our large scale cooperation, which no other animal can do. No, and chimpanzees may be smart enough, but they never develop that kind of township, for example, cities, and these large scale cooperation, no way, because they cannot suppress these malicious cheating. But in humans, I think what we can do the best, the easiest to do is, well, critical thinking. You always give anything too good to be true. Do not give a doubt out of that. You start with being more doubtful, especially on issues that feel like too good to be true. So this is our first line of defense by being critical. Do not believe things. Always have a voice in your mind that is tell yourself that is not true. The second is, well, of course, the cheating scams can be new, can be complicated, can be harder to tell. Sort of like a Bernie Madoff. Many of his victims were actually financially savvy. These were relatively well-off people. But how could they not tell the scam earlier until everything was lost? So we always needed, not only we have knowledge, we have critical thinking skills, but also we need the kind of alerting system showing that there is a better guy around. the sort of like education, the warning signal in the community, telling people there's a new scam around, be aware of that, so people will pay more attention to that. And lastly, we also have this punishment that would suppress these malicious cheating for profit, in whatever way, material or political or social, whatever the benefit is associated with cheating. If we can impose more punishment, we will reduce the scale of that kind of cheating. So these are the sort of like the wisdom we can extract from our immune response, the response of our immune system, how our immune system deals with that.
Well, last question. I mean, I think, all of us share a fairness instinct. All of us share a kind of moral respect for honesty. But, I mean, you mentioned sort of an aesthetic appreciation of all the different strategies. I mean, do you think that we also all share sort of kind of some aesthetic appreciation for good deceivers? I mean, there are all these movies about con artists and movies about, art forgers and, the Frank Abagnale story that you talk about. I mean, when you learn about this, a lot of people are like, well, that's kind of cool. Like I can sort of see the beauty in that. Do you think that people, do have some, I guess, aesthetic appreciation for all strategies, even the ones that we would consider to be something immoral?
Yeah, we are always curious, right? That's humans, right? We are curious about things. Many of the things we are afraid of, for example, these horror movies, for example, or the murder movies. Do we really appreciate murdering? We like Catch Me If You Can, that kind of Frank Abagnale movie. No, not necessarily, but we are prepared for that. We are interested in that kind of movie because we would often say, what if I encounter that kind of situation? Would I react better? Would I act in a way that can protect myself? For most honest people are like that. And that kind of seeking for thriller, seeking for the kind of unusual experience actually can prepare us better to handle that kind of situation if we are in that kind of situation. So I wouldn't say people have a better taste of these weird movies, especially these immoral and illegal, the kind of maneuver. And by the way, Frank Abagnale actually wrote that book, Catch Me If You Can. He did not do most of it. He basically he used that book to make him famous. And got people to talk about him all the time. Now, This is sort of like a super cheater. Yeah, he made up all the stories to make people interested in it. In the beginning, I thought that was not possible. You could do that. Mm-hmm. So when I use that story to as a narrative arch for chapter number 6 about human cheating, people will say, "Do you believe it?" I say no. I had an actual footnote somewhere. Do not believe whatever he said. But somehow during the final version, that footnote got lost somewhere during the publication process. So Elizabeth Colbert actually during the review in the New Yorker, she said, "I got fooled." No, I said that was not. But she was using the kind of a story as sort of her review narrative, narrative for her review. Yes, I was suspicious from right beginning. And recently, actually, there was a new book saying that Frank Abagnale did not do all these things. He just made it up for making people interested in his stories. And so he could sell more books.
That's classic. I love that.
Oh, that is, yeah.
And I think he would go around and give talks, right, at universities about his exploits. Right.
Now he was successful by fooling the readers.
Right. I love it. Yeah. Well, Lixing, thank you so much for joining me. The book is called "The Liars of Nature and the Nature of Liars," and don't forget about the fairness instinct. And I intend to check out your book on beavers. Should be arriving any day now. Thanks so much. Yeah,
there is a newer version as well. That's great. Thank you very much, Greg. It was great to talk with you.
We'll talk soon.
unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.